The story of Hindu thought begins with the oldest songs that people ever sang. Those songs are called the Vedas. The word Veda means knowledge in the ancient language of Sanskrit. The Vedas are 4 collections. They are called the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, the Yajur Veda, and the Atharva Veda. The Rig Veda is the oldest of them. Scholars say it was put together in the early Bronze Age, around 3,000 years before Christ. At that time, people lived in small villages near the rivers. They gathered around a fire and sang verses that praised the sky, the sun, the wind, and the rivers. The verses also asked the gods for rain and for safe travel. One line from the Rig Veda says, "May we be protected by the power of the sun, the giver of life." That line shows how the early poets linked the world they lived in with a sense of order. The order they felt was not just a set of rules. It was a feeling that the world had a pattern, a rhythm that people could follow. The next big step in the story is the Upanishads. The word Upanishad means sitting down near. It describes a scene where a student sits close to a teacher and listens to deep talk about the nature of self and reality. The Upanishads were written after the Vedas, in the later part of the 2nd millennium BCE. They take the hymns of the Vedas and ask new questions. They wonder what the words really mean. They wonder what the self is, and what the universe is, and what the universe. One famous Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka, records a dialogue between a king named Janaka and a sage called Yajnavalkya. In that dialogue, Janaka asks, "What is the true self?" Yajnavalkya answers, "The self is not the body, not the breath, not the mind. It is the unchanging light that shines in all." That answer shows a shift from worship of many gods to a search for an inner principle that stays the same. The idea that ties the Vedas and the Upanishads together is called dogma. The word dogma is often heard in modern news reports, but its meaning is deeper than a simple translation. In plain terms, dogma is the set of duties, rights, laws, and conduct that keep a person in harmony with the world. It is the path that fits a person's role, their age, their family, and their community. Dharma can be thought of as the right way to act. It is not a single rule, but a pattern that changes with time and place. When a farmer tends a field, his dharma is to sow seeds, water the crops, and protect the harvest. When a student studies, his dharma is to learn, to respect teachers, and to share knowledge later. The same word also appears in the Vedas as a word for order or cosmic law. In the Rig Veda, a line reads, "May the order of the world be upheld, may the righteous path be followed." That line links the word to the idea that the world works best when each part does its part. The poet Vyasa is another key figure in this early period. Vyasa is traditionally said to have compiled the Vedas into the 4 books we know today. He also wrote the great epic Mahabharata, which contains the famous Bhagavad Gita. In the Gita, the hero Arjuna asks his charioteer Krishna what his duty is. Krishna replies, "Do your duty without attachment to the result." That line is often quoted as a short definition of dharma. Act rightly, let go of the outcome. Vyasa's work shows how dharma moves from the ancient hymns to stories that people can read and feel in daily life. To see dharma in a modern setting, think of traffic rules. When a driver stops at a red light, he follows a rule that keeps the road safe. The rule is not a law that exists only on paper. It is a part of the larger order that lets many cars move without crashing. When a driver respects the rule, the whole system works better. That respect is an example of Dharma in everyday life. Another simple example is caring for a garden. A person who waters the plants, pulls weeds, and protects the garden from pests follows a pattern that keeps the garden healthy. The garden then gives fruit, shade, and beauty. The act of caring is a small piece of the larger order that the world needs. The idea of Dharma is not without criticism. Some thinkers say that Dharma is too vague to be useful. They point out that the word can mean beauty, law, righteousness, or custom all at once. Because it can mean many things, they argue that it does not give clear guidance for a person who faces a tough choice. For instance, a soldier may be told that his dharma is to protect his country. But he may also be told that his dharma is to protect all life. When those two duties clash, the word does not tell which one should win. Critics say that this lack of precision makes dharma more a feeling than a rule. A second criticism says that dharma can limit personal freedom. In a traditional society, a person's dharma is often tied to caste, family, or gender. That can mean that a woman is expected to stay at home, or a person of a certain caste is expected to do a specific job. Critics argue that such expectations trap people in roles they did not choose. They say that dharma, when used as a social tool, can become a way to keep power in the hands of a few. The criticism is that the word can be turned into a weapon that stops people from exploring new paths. Supporters of Dharma answer these critiques by pointing out that the concept is meant to be flexible. The Upanishads teach that Dharma is not a fixed set of rules, but a living principle that changes with the time and the person. When a person grows older, his duties change. When a society changes, the customs that were once called dharma also change. The sages taught that the heart must guide the mind, and that the true dharma is what keeps the inner light steady. In that view, a vague word can be a guide that adapts, not a prison that locks. The early stories also give a sense of how dharma was lived. One anecdote tells how the Rig Veda was composed during a time when people moved from hunting to farming. The shift required new duties. The poets sang about the need to honor the earth, to plant seeds at the right season, and to share the harvest with the tribe. That shift shows Dharma as a response to a change in life. Another story is the dialogue between King Janaka and Yajnavalkya. Janaka, a ruler, asks the sage what a king should do. Yajnavalkya replies that a king's dharma is to protect his people, to be fair, and to seek truth. He also says that a king must not cling to power for its own sake, because power without wisdom leads to disorder. That dialogue is recorded in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad and is often quoted as, "When a ruler sees the good of all, his rule is just." The teachings of Dharma also link to later ideas that will be explored in later sections of the video. The concept of karma, the law of cause and effect, is said to work hand in hand with Dharma. When a person follows his Dharma, he creates good karma, which leads to a better future. When a person breaks his Dharma, he creates bad karma, which leads to difficulty later. The idea of moksha, the release from the cycle of birth and death, is the final goal for many seekers. Moksha is said to be reached when a person has acted in harmony with Dharma for many lifetimes, letting go of selfish desire. Those later sections will show how Dharma, karma, and moksha form a triangle that guides a life. Modern thinkers still talk about Dharma. Some scholars compare Dharma to the modern idea of social responsibility. They say that a business that treats its workers well, protects the environment, and offers fair prices is following a kind of dharma. Others see dharma as a personal moral compass that can be used in any culture. A teacher in a city might think of her dharma as helping each child learn, even when the school system is hard. In that sense, dharma is not limited to ancient India. It is a word that can describe any situation where a person acts in a way that fits the larger order. One modern example is a doctor who chooses to work in a remote village instead of a big city hospital. The doctor's dharma, in that view, is to bring health to those who lack it. The doctor may give up higher pay, but the act follows the pattern of caring for others, which keeps the whole community healthier. Another example is a software engineer who writes code that protects user privacy. By making sure that data is safe, the engineer follows a rule that protects trust in the digital world. Both examples show dharma as a living guide that can be applied to any field. The ancient texts also give short sayings that help explain dharma. In the Manusmriti, an old law book, a line reads, "One who follows dharma lives in peace." In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, "Do your duty, O Arjuna, without attachment." Those lines are short, but they hold a lot of meaning. They tell a listener that the right way to act is to follow one's role, and to do it without selfish desire. The Vedas also talk about the idea of arteya, which means cosmic order. Arche is the early word that later became Dharma. In the Rig Veda, a priest says, "May the rata be upheld, may the world be in balance." That shows that the ancient people felt the world works best when each part follows its proper place. The Upanishads later turned that external order into an inner order. Yajnavalkya says, "When the mind rests in the true self, the world becomes calm. The calm mind is the inner dharma that matches the outer artha." The story of Vyasa's compilation of the Vedas also shows how dharma was organized. Vyasa gathered scattered verses, sorted them, and gave them names. By doing so, he created a system that people could study and follow. The act of organizing knowledge itself is a kind of dharma, because it helps the community stay in order. Vyasa's work also reminds the listener that dharma is not static. It can be written down, but it must also be lived. When the Rig Veda was first sung, the people were nomadic. They had to follow the seasons, move with the herds, and respect the rivers. Their dharma was to survive and to honor the forces that gave them food. As they settled, their dharma changed. They built houses, grew crops, and formed families. The Upanishads record that shift. They ask deeper questions about why the world works, and they give a new way to think about duty. The shift from external rites to inner understanding is a key turning point. The dialogue between Janaka and Yajnavalkya also gives a clear picture of how dharma can be questioned. Janaka asks, "What is the highest dharma?" Yajnavalkya answers, "The highest dharma is to know the self. For when the self is known, all actions become pure." That answer moves dharma from a set of external actions to an inner state. It shows that the ancient sages saw dharma as both outer conduct and inner wisdom. A modern reader may wonder how to use dharma today. One simple way is to ask, what is my role right now? If a person is a parent, the dharma may be to protect, teach, and love the child. If a person is a driver, the dharma may be to follow traffic signs, keep the vehicle safe, and not endanger others. The question helps the person see the link between personal action and the larger order. Critics who say dharma is too vague often point to the many different meanings in the texts. They note that the word appears in over 1,000 verses. each with the story of karma, begins in the earliest days of Hindu thought. It is a simple idea that every act brings a result. The word karma comes from a root that means action. The idea is that each action plants a seed. The seed later grows into a fruit. The fruit may be good or bad, depending on the seed. In this way, karma links cause and effect. The first system that gave a clear shape to karma was the Samkhya school. Its founder, Kapila, taught that the world is made of two forces. One is pure consciousness. The other is material nature. Kapila said that the material side is driven by the law of cause and effect. He wrote that every thought, word, and deed creates a subtle imprint. Those imprints travel forward and shape future experience. Kapila's teaching is found in the Samkhya Karika, an early text that says action is the source of all change. This line shows how the early thinkers saw karma as the engine of life. Later, the Bhagavad Gita gave the idea a vivid voice. In the Gita, the warrior Arjuna is confused about his duty. Krishna, who is his charioteer and a divine guide, explains that action is not to be avoided. He says, "You have the right to work, but never to the fruit of work." This quote tells a student that the focus should be on doing the right thing, not on the reward. Krishna also says that actions performed with a pure heart become a path to freedom. The Gita's view of karma ties the idea to dharma, the personal duty that each person must follow. The concept of rebirth is tied to karma. The story goes that the soul, or Atman, moves from one life to another. The quality of each new life depends on the karma of the past. If a person plants kind deeds, the next life will be pleasant. If the deeds are harmful, the next life will be difficult. This cycle of birth, death, and rebirth is called samsara. The goal of the whole system is to end samsara. That final release is called moksha, or liberation. Moksha is reached when the soul no longer carries the weight of karma. A garden can help a listener picture this. Imagine a garden where each seed is an action. A kind word is a seed of a rose. A harsh word is a seed of a thorn bush. The gardener does not see the garden all at once. He sees each seed as it is planted. Over time, the garden shows the result of the gardener's care. If the gardener waters the roses and pulls the weeds, the garden will be bright. If the gardener ignores the garden, the weeds will take over. In the same way, a person's life shows the result of many small actions. The garden does not punish, it simply shows what was done. A school report card offers another picture. At the end of a term, a student receives marks for each subject. The marks are not random, they are the sum of the work the student did each day. If the student studied, turned in homework, and asked questions, the marks will be high. If the student skipped class and did not try, the marks will be low. The report card tells the student what the effort was. Karma works in a similar way. It records the effort of the mind and body and shows the outcome later. These simple pictures help people see that karma is not a mystical punishment. It is a natural law, like gravity. Just as a stone falls when dropped, a kind act creates a kind result. The law works without a judge. It works quietly, in the background of daily life. The idea of karma spread far beyond the early teachers. In the Mauryan Empire, the courts of Emperor Ashoka heard the word. Ashoka had once been a fierce ruler. After a great battle, he saw the suffering his army caused. He turned to the teachings of the Buddha and the ideas of karma. He sent out edicts that spoke of right action and the effects of deeds. One edict says, all beings are linked by cause and effect. One who harms another harms himself. This shows that the idea of karma was used to guide rulers. It helped them see that harsh policies would bring bad results for the kingdom. At the same time, a debate was taking place between Buddhist scholars and Hindu scholars. In the 3rd century BCE, a Buddhist monk named Mahakashapa met a Hindu philosopher named Kumarila. They argued about the nature of rebirth. The Buddhist said that rebirth is a result of mental habits, not of a permanent soul. The Hindu said that the Atman moves through lives, carrying karma. The debate was recorded by later writers. It shows that even in ancient times, people questioned how karma and rebirth fit together. The argument helped sharpen the ideas on both sides. The concept of karma has faced criticism. One common criticism is that it can become fatalistic. Some people think that if all actions are already recorded, then there is no point in trying to change. They may say, if my fate is already set by past deeds, why bother? This view can turn karma into an excuse for passivity. It can make a person think that suffering is deserved and unchangeable. The fatalistic reading ignores the part of the teaching that says one can change the pattern by new actions. The Gita itself warns against such a view. Krishna tells Arjuna that each moment offers a fresh chance to act rightly. The teaching invites effort, not resignation. A second criticism comes from modern science. Scientists who study the brain, physics, and biology do not find evidence for a soul that moves from one body to another. They say that consciousness ends when the body dies. Because there is no measurable mechanism for rebirth, they reject the idea. This scientific view challenges the traditional karma-rebirth link. Some modern thinkers respond by saying that karma can be understood as a psychological pattern. They argue that habits formed in one life shape behavior in the next, even if the next life is metaphorical. Others keep the spiritual meaning but accept that science does not yet have the tools to test it. The dialogue between science and tradition continues. Even with these challenges, karma still finds a place in everyday life. A person who cares for the environment may think of the planet as a garden. When the person recycles, saves water, and plants trees, the result is a healthier earth. The person may feel that the good deeds will bring a better world for future generations. This is a modern application of the karma idea. It does not require belief in rebirth, only belief that actions shape the future. In another example, a teacher may use the karma idea to help students understand responsibility. The teacher can say, when you help a classmate, the class feels better. When you cheat, the trust breaks. The students see that their choices affect the whole group. The teacher is using the cause and effect logic of karma to build a caring community. The lesson does not need any mystic language. It simply shows that each act has a ripple. Modern philosophers have taken the old idea and given it new language. Some call it ethical causality. They argue that moral actions create social conditions that either support or undermine human flourishing. In this view, karma is a way to talk about how societies grow. Others link karma to the concept of feedback loops in psychology. When a person receives praise for a good act, the brain releases dopamine. The dopamine makes the person want to repeat the act. This creates a loop that encourages positive behavior. The loop is a modern way to describe the ancient law of cause and effect. The idea also appears in law. A legal system that punishes wrongdoing and rewards good behavior reflects a karma-like principle. The law says that if a person steals, there will be a penalty. If a person helps a neighbor, there may be a social reward. The law does not claim a cosmic balance, but it works on the same idea that actions lead to results. The link between karma and dharma is central. Dharma means the right way of living for each person. It includes duties to family, society, and self. When a person follows dharma, the actions are aligned with the cosmic order. The result is good karma. When a person ignores dharma, the actions cause bad karma. The Gita says, when duty is performed without selfish desire, the soul is freed. This shows that dharma is the path that shapes karma, and karma shapes the path toward moksha. Moksha is the final goal. It is the release from the endless cycle of birth and death. When a soul no longer carries karma, it can rest in pure consciousness. The journey to moksha is built on many small steps. Each step is a right action, a mindful choice, a moment of compassion. Over time, the weight of karma becomes light. The soul can then see the true nature of reality. This picture ties the everyday idea of cause and effect to the highest spiritual aim. A story from the ancient text illustrates this path. In the story of Srimad Bhagavatam, a king named Harishchandra faces a test. He loses his kingdom, his wife, and his son because of a promise he made. He works as a night watchman, selling his own son for a small amount. He never gives up his truth. In the end, the gods restore his family and kingdom because his actions were pure. The story shows that even when the result seems harsh, the inner quality of the action matters. The cause was his steadfastness. The effect was eventual restoration. The tale is used to teach that karma works on a deep level, beyond immediate appearance. Another tale comes from the Upanishads. A sage named Yajnavalkya asks a student, "What is the fruit of a good mind?" The student replies, "Peace." Yajnavalkya says, "The fruit is peace, and the seed is a calm heart." This short exchange captures the idea that inner calm creates outward benefit. The story is often told in schools to show that the mind's work is part of the karma system. The spread of karma ideas in the Mauryan courts also shows how the concept can shape politics. Ashoka's edicts encouraged kindness to all living beings. He ordered that no animal be harmed for sport. He sent officials to check that tax collectors treated people fairly. The edicts claim that good deeds bring prosperity to the kingdom. The ruler used the idea of cause and effect to guide public policy. The historical record shows that the concept was not only a personal belief, but a tool for social change. The debate between Buddhist and Hindu scholars in the 3rd century BCE added depth to the idea. The Buddhists argued that there is no permanent soul, only a stream of mental events. They said that karma attaches to this stream, not to a soul. The Hindu scholars defended the Atman, saying that the soul carries the karmic record. This debate forced both sides to clarify their positions. It also led to a richer understanding of how actions connect to future experience. The dialogue is recorded in the Buddhist text, Milinda Panha, and in Hindu commentaries. It shows that the idea of karma was alive and evolving. In modern times, the concept appears in popular culture. A movie may show a character who makes a selfish choice and later faces loss. The audience sees the moral lesson that the choice had a price. The film does not name karma, but it uses the same pattern. In everyday conversation, people often say, What goes around comes around. This phrase is a shorthand for karma. It shows that the ancient idea still lives in the language of the world. The idea also influences personal habits. A person who decides to meditate each morning may notice that they feel calmer during the day. The calm feeling leads to kinder speech. The kinder speech improves relationships. The improved relationships bring more support. The chain of events is a personal karma loop. The person may not think of it as karma, but the pattern is the same. The concept can be a guide for technology use. When a person, the story of Atman and Brahman begins in the earliest verses of the Upanishads. Those ancient texts speak of a hidden self that lives inside each being. They call that self Atman. At the same time, they speak of a larger reality that holds all things. They call that reality Brahman. The two names appear side by side in many passages. The idea is that the inner self is not separate from the larger whole. It is like a candle in a dark room. The flame is small, but it is made of the same light that fills the room. When the candle is lit, the room becomes bright. The light of the candle and the light of the room are one. In the same way, Atman is a small spark of the great light of Brahman. Another picture helps the mind. Imagine a river that runs through a valley. The river twists and turns. It meets many rocks and bends around hills. At the end of its journey, it pours into the sea. The water in the river is the same as the water in the sea. The river does not lose its nature when it joins the ocean. The river simply becomes part of the larger body. The Upanishadic sages use this picture to show how the personal self joins the universal self. The river is Atman. The sea is Brahman. The sea is Brahman. The earliest Upanishadic sages who wrote about this idea were not philosophers in the modern sense. They were seekers who sat by fire, looked at the stars, and asked what lies behind the world of change. In the Chandogya Upanishad, a teacher named Udalaka tells his son Shvetakettu a simple line. Tat Tvam Asi. That phrase means, that thou art. It tells the listener that the inner self is the same as the ultimate reality. The line is repeated many times in the text. Each repetition is a reminder that the small and the great are not two things but one. Later, the philosopher Adi Shankaracharya, often called Shankara, took these ideas and built a system called Advaita Vedanta. Advaita means non-duality. Shankara argued that all apparent differences are like shadows on a wall. The shadows change with light, but the wall stays the same. He said that Atman is the true nature of every being. He also said that Brahman is the only real thing. The world we see, the body we feel, the thoughts we think are all temporary. They appear real because the mind adds names and forms. When the mind stops adding, the true self shines through. Shankara's famous quote from his commentary on the Brahma Sutras captures his view. Brahman alone is real. The world is unreal. The individual self is Brahman. In simple words, he says that the only lasting thing is the universal reality, and the personal self is just a reflection of that. He used logic, scriptural proof, and vivid examples to make his case. One story about him shows how he defended this view in a public debate at Kashi, the holy city of Varanasi. A scholar named Maharishi Mira, a great expert in ritual and logic, challenged Shankara. The debate lasted for many days. Each day the two men offered arguments and counter-arguments. In the end, Shankara asked the scholar to look inside his own heart and see the same light that shines in the temple. The scholar, humbled, accepted the teaching. This anecdote is often told to illustrate how the truth of Atman and Brahman can be felt, not only argued. Another ancient anecdote comes from the commentaries on the Chandogya Upanishad written by the sage Gaudapada. He wrote a short text called the Mandukya Karika. In it he compares the self to a wave that rises and falls on the ocean. He says that the wave does not exist apart from the ocean. When the wave stops, the water returns to the ocean. The analogy helps a listener picture how the personal self merges back into the universal. The commentaries were studied for centuries and became a key source for later teachers. The idea that Atman equals Brahman raises several questions. One common objection is that the self is an illusion. Some schools of Indian thought, such as Buddhism, argue that there is no permanent self at all. They say that what we call self is just a collection of changing thoughts, feelings, and sensations. If there is no real self, then how can there be a true self that matches the universal? This objection is called the anatta view in Buddhist teachings. It points out that when we look closely, we never find a fixed thing that stays the same. The argument is that the sense of a lasting self is a mental habit, not a fact. A second objection comes from those who think Brahman cannot be known. They claim that the ultimate reality is beyond words, beyond mind, and beyond any experience. If Brahman is unknowable, then the claim that Atman is Brahman seems empty. This view appears in some strands of the later Vedanta tradition, especially in the apophatic approach. Apophatic means describing what something is not, rather than what it is. The argument says that any description of Brahman will fall short. So the identity of Atman and Brahman cannot be proven. Both objections have been answered by later teachers. In response to the self is illusion claim, Shankara said that the illusion is only the idea of a separate, changing self. The true self, Atman, is not a collection of parts. It is the unchanging witness. He used the metaphor of a screen behind a movie. The pictures on the screen change, but the screen itself stays the same. The screen is like Atman. The pictures are like the body and mind. When the mind stops identifying with the pictures, the screen becomes clear. To answer the claim that Brahman is unknowable, Shankara pointed to the Upanishadic statement, Brahma satyam jagat mithya, jivo brahmaivana apara, which means Brahman is truth, the world is false, the individual self is none other than Brahman. He said that the knowledge of Brahman is not a matter of ordinary sense perception. It is a direct inner seeing that happens when the mind is still. He called this knowledge jnana. He gave the example of a blind person who touches a candle. The person cannot see the flame, but when the eyes open, the light becomes clear. In the same way, when the mind opens, the light of Brahman is seen. These arguments are not only abstract ideas. They have real-world applications. In the practice of yoga, the goal is often described as union with the divine. One of the 8 limbs of yoga, called dhyana, is meditation. In meditation, the practitioner sits quietly, watches the breath, and lets thoughts pass. The aim is to quiet the mind so that the sense of a separate self falls away. When the mind is still, many report a feeling of oneness with everything. This feeling matches the description of Atman realizing its identity with Brahman. Another application appears in everyday life. When a person feels deep love for another, there is a sense that the boundary between self and other softens. The lover may say, "I feel as if we are one." This feeling can be seen as a glimpse of the Atman-Brahman connection. It shows that the philosophical idea can be lived, not only studied. Modern thinkers have taken the Atman-Brahman concept into new fields. In psychology, the idea of a core self that is stable across life stages resembles Atman. Some therapists talk about the true self that is hidden beneath roles and defenses. When a client connects with that core, they often feel more at peace. In physics, the notion that all particles are expressions of a single field can be compared to the idea that all forms are expressions of Brahman. While the language is different, the intuition that the many are one is shared. An example from daily life helps to picture the concept. Imagine a small seed planted in soil. The seed contains the potential of a tall tree. When the seed sprouts, it grows leaves, branches, and fruit. Yet the seed essence remains the same. The tree does not become a new thing. It is the seed's growth. In the same way, the individual self grows, learns, and acts, but its core remains the same as the universal. A second example uses music. A single note played on a flute can blend into a full orchestra. The note does not lose its identity, but it becomes part of a larger harmony. When the orchestra stops, the note can be heard again on its own. The note is like Atman. The orchestra is like Brahman. The note is never separate from the music. It is a part of the whole. The story of Shankara's debate at Kashi also shows how the idea can change a mind. The scholar Madhyana Mira was known for his strong arguments in favor of ritual and the power of deeds. He believed that correct action could lead to a good afterlife. Shankara asked him to look inside and see the same light that shines on the altar. When the scholar realized that the inner light was the same as the outer, he let go of his reliance on external rites. This story is told to illustrate how the insight of Atman Brahman can transform one's view of duty and belief. The ancient commentaries on the Chandogya Upanishad provide another vivid picture. In one passage, a sage named Sanat Kumara tells his disciple that the self is like a pot of water placed in a river. The pot looks separate, but the water inside is the same as the river's water. When the pot is lifted, the water spills back into the river. The lesson is that the self cannot be separated from the universal. The commentaries repeat this image for generations, showing how teachers used simple pictures to convey deep truths. Quotes from the primary sources reinforce the teaching. The Mundaka Upanishad says, "He who knows the self, the knower of the self, is beyond sorrow." This line tells that knowing the true self brings freedom from pain. The Bhagavad Gita, spoken by the god Krishna to the warrior Arjuna, states, "Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman." In the context of the dialogue, Krishna tells Arjuna that his true nature is not the body or the mind, but the eternal reality. The Gita also says, "When a man sees himself in all beings, and all beings in himself, then he is truly wise." This line links the personal view to the universal view. The teaching of Atman and Brahman also appears in the practice of bhakti, devotional worship. When a devotee sings a hymn, they often feel that their heart merges with the divine. The feeling of being one with the deity is a form of experiencing the Atman-Brahman link. The poet Saint Mirabai wrote, "My heart is the lamp, and the divine is the flame." In her words, the inner light and the outer light become one. In the story of yoga in Hindu thought is a story of many paths that lead toward the same goal. The goal is moksha, the freedom from the cycle of birth and death. The guide for each path is dharma, the right way of living. In the ancient texts, there are 4 main ways to walk the road. They are called bhakti yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga, and raja yoga. Each path has its own flavor, its own practice, and its own teachers. The 4 paths can be shown with simple pictures that anyone can see in daily life. First, imagine a devotee in a small temple. The night is dark and the wind is soft. The devotee takes a lamp, lights the wick, and places the flame before the image of the divine. The flame flickers, and the devotee bows, sings a simple hymn, and feels the love in the heart grow. This picture is bhakti yoga, the path of devotion. Bhakti means love and surrender. The practice is to give the heart to the divine, to see the divine in every breath, in every sound, in every sight. The ancient teacher Ramanuja wrote that the soul is like a lamp that shines when it is lit by love. He said, "The Supreme is the source of all love. The devotee who sees that source lives in bliss." In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, "When a man offers his whole being to me with love and devotion, he attains the highest peace." This shows that bhakti yoga is not just a ritual of lighting lamps, but a way to turn the heart toward the divine. Second, picture a young person who walks from house to house in a village. The person carries a basket of food, a bundle of blankets, and a smile. The neighbor's roof has leaked. The child is sick. The old man cannot fetch water. The volunteer helps each one, without asking for thanks, without keeping a score. This is karma yoga, the path of selfless action. Karma means work, but the word in this context means work done without attachment to the result. The teacher in the Gita says, "Perform your duty, O Arjuna, but give up the desire for reward." The idea is that each act, when done with the right intention, becomes a prayer. The act is not meant to earn merit, but to purify the mind. The ancient story of the sage Vasistha shows this. Vasistha left his hermitage to feed a hungry traveler, and the traveler turned out to be a god in disguise. The story teaches that selfless service opens the door to the divine. See a student sitting at a desk, a puzzle spread before him. The puzzle is a set of riddles about the nature of the self, about what is real and what is not. The student works slowly, asks questions, reads the Upanishads, and writes notes. The student's mind sharpens, and a moment comes when the pieces click. The student sees that the self is not the body, not the mind, but a pure awareness that underlies all. This is jnana yoga, the path of knowledge. Jnana means wisdom. The practice is study, reflection, and discrimination between what is real and what is not. The teacher Shankara, a great exponent of jnana, said, "The self is like a mirror. When the dust of ignorance is removed, the light of truth shines." In the Gita, Krishna says, "When the mind is steady, the seeker sees the self as one with the whole." Jnana Yoga asks the seeker to ask, "Who am I?" and to keep looking until the answer is clear. Fourth, watch a person sitting quietly on a cushion, eyes closed, breathing in and out. The breath comes in like a wave, then goes out like a tide. The person watches each breath, does not try to change it, just lets it be. The mind may wander, but the person gently brings it back to the breath. This is Raja Yoga, the royal path of meditation. Raja means king, because this path is said to bring the mind under the ruler's control. The classic guide for this path is the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Patanjali wrote, "When the mind is quiet, the self shines. The sutras are short verses that give a step-by-step guide to calm the mind. The story of Patanjali's compilation tells that a sage named Patanjali gathered the teachings of many earlier masters and wrote them down on palm leaves. He said, "The practice of breath, the practice of posture, the practice of concentration together bring peace." The practice of Raja Yoga is often called the Eightfold Path because Patanjali listed 8 steps. Ethical rules, proper posture, breath control, withdrawal of the senses, concentration, meditation, and finally, samadhi, the state of deep absorption. All 4 paths are different, but they are not separate islands. They overlap like the 4 sides of a square. A devotee may also serve the neighbor, a student may also sit in quiet, a worker may also study the scriptures. The ancient texts say that the paths support each other. The Gita says, "Those who worship me with devotion, who act without selfish desire, who study the truth, and who meditate on the breath, all reach the same goal." The 4 paths are like 4 rivers that flow into the same ocean of liberation. The rise of the Bhakti movement in South India gives a vivid picture of how devotion can change a whole culture. In the 12th century, a poet saint named Namovar began to sing simple verses in Tamil that praise the divine as a loving mother. He walked from village to village, singing by the river, lighting lamps, and inviting people to join in song. His verses spread quickly because they used everyday language, not complex Sanskrit. Soon, many other saints joined him, each adding their own songs. The movement grew into a wave that reached the courts of kings. The kings built temples, invited poets, and funded festivals. The Bhakti movement showed that devotion could be a path for everyone, not just scholars. It also showed how Bhakti Yoga could become a social force that changed how people lived, ate, and cared for each other. Patanjali's work on the Yoga Sutras tells another story. In the early centuries of the Common Era, many teachers taught meditation, breath, and ethical conduct, but the teachings were scattered. Patanjali, a sage who lived in a forest, heard the teachings from many teachers and wrote them down in a concise form. He used short aphorisms, each only a few words long. He called the collection Yoga Sutras, meaning threads of yoga. He said, "When the mind is still, the self is revealed." The sutras became a guide that could be studied by anyone who could read. Over time, the sutras were commented on by many later teachers, each adding their own insight. The story of Patanjali shows how a clear, simple guide can help many people practice Raja Yoga, even when life is busy. Even with these inspiring stories, there are people who raise doubts about yoga. One criticism says that yoga can become a set of empty rituals. A person may light a lamp every evening, chant a mantra, and bow, but do so without feeling love or devotion. The act becomes a habit that looks like devotion but lacks the inner fire. The teacher Ramanuja warned against this. He said, "A lamp that is lit without oil burns quickly and gives no light." In other words, the outer form must be matched by inner feeling. If a person repeats the steps without heart, the practice does not move the mind toward moksha. A second criticism says that yoga may clash with modern life. In a world of constant alerts, deadlines, and traffic, finding time to sit in quiet, to study deep texts, or to serve the neighbor can seem impossible. A busy professional may feel that the practice of meditation is a luxury, that the path of selfless service is a waste of time, that devotion is a distraction from work. The modern skeptic asks, how can one keep a lamp burning when the electricity bill is high? The answer offered by the tradition is that yoga is not about adding more tasks, but about changing the way each task is done. The devotee can light a lamp while cooking, the worker can help a neighbor while walking home, the student can see study as a form of meditation, the meditator can practice breath while waiting for a bus. The practice is woven into daily life, not set apart from it. The four paths also show how dharma and moksha are linked. Dharma is the right way of acting, the duty that keeps the world in balance. When a person follows dharma through bhakti, karma, jnana, or raja, the mind becomes clear, the heart becomes open, and the soul moves toward moksha. The Gita says, "Perform your duty, but do not cling to the results. Then you will be free." This line ties the idea of duty to the idea of liberation. Each path gives a different way to practice dharma. The devotee follows dharma by loving the divine, the worker follows dharma by serving without selfish desire, the scholar follows dharma by seeking truth. The meditator follows dharma by calming the mind. Real-world examples show how the paths work today. In a small town in Kerala, a group of women meet every evening to light oil lamps in the local shrine. They share stories, sing together, and talk about their hopes. The lamp they light is a symbol of bhakti, but the time they spend together also builds a community. The act of lighting the lamp becomes a reminder to love and serve each other. In another city, a volunteer group called Hands for Neighbors helps seniors with groceries, repairs, and companionship. The volunteers do not ask for payment. Their work is an example of karma yoga in a modern setting. Their actions keep the social fabric strong, and they feel a sense of purpose that goes beyond a paycheck. In a university, a philosophy club meets to discuss the Upanishads and the idea of the self. The students ask questions, write essays, and sometimes have moments of insight where they feel a deep calm. Their study is an example of jnana yoga, a quest for knowledge that changes how they see themselves. Moksha means freedom from the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. In the earlier parts of this series, the idea of Atman, the true self, was explained, and the role of karma and yoga in shaping that self was described. Now the focus turns to the final goal that many Hindu thinkers call moksha. The word itself can be heard in prayers, in stories, and in the quiet thoughts of a person who sits by a river and watches the water flow. It is the moment when the soul steps out of the wheel of samsara, the wheel of life, and rests in a state of pure peace. A simple picture helps to see what moksha feels like. Imagine a small bird that has lived its whole life inside a wooden cage. The bird can sing, it can eat, it can move from perch to perch, but its wings never stretch fully. One day a kind hand opens the cage door. The bird feels a rush of wind, a taste of sky, and it flies out, leaving behind the bars that once seemed permanent. That flight is like moksha. The bird is not abandoning its nature. It is finally using the wings it was born with. The cage was the illusion of limitation, and the open sky is the true home of the bird. Another everyday picture shows a student who has studied for many years, passed exams, and finally walks across a stage to receive a diploma. The ceremony marks the end of a long period of learning, practice, and effort. The student does not stop being a learner, but the moment of graduation shows a clear change of status. In the same way, moksha marks the end of a long spiritual practice, a change in status that is felt deep inside. The body and mind still work, but the inner self has reached a point where it no longer needs to chase after worldly goals. The ancient text called the Bhagavata Purana gives a vivid description of this state. It says, "When the living being sees the self as the only reality, all fear and all sorrow disappear." This line shows that moksha is not just an abstract idea. It is a feeling of complete release from fear. Vidyaranya, a medieval scholar who wrote a famous commentary on the Brahma Sutras, also speaks about moksha. He writes, "Moksha is the end of all suffering, the final rest of the soul, the true home beyond all change." Vidyaranya's words are often quoted in modern classes on Hindu philosophy because they capture the calm certainty that moksha promises. The path to moksha is usually described as a long road of practice. Yoga, the discipline of body and mind, is one of the main tools. Karma, the law of cause and effect, shapes the experiences that push a person toward or away from liberation. When a person follows a path of selfless action, truthful speech, and meditation, the mind becomes clear. In that clear mind, the true nature of the self can be seen. The earlier sections on karma and yoga showed how each good act adds a step toward that clear mind, and each harmful act adds a step away. In the Advaita tradition, which means non-dual or not two, moksha is described as the realization that the self is not separate from the ultimate reality, called Brahman. The famous phrase, Tat Tvam Asi, that is you, from the Upanishads, is often used to illustrate this point. When a seeker truly understands that his own Atman is the same as Brahman, the feeling of separation falls away, and moksha is said to be achieved. The idea is that the world of names and forms is like a dream, and waking from that dream is moksha. Not everyone agrees that moksha is easy to reach. One common criticism says that moksha is a goal that only a few saints can ever attain. The argument points out that most people are caught in daily responsibilities, in poverty, in illness, and in the pull of family and work. For them, the idea of stepping out of the cycle of birth may seem like a fantasy. The critic asks, if the path requires years of study, meditation, and renunciation, how can a farmer or a mother find the time or the support to follow it? This view stresses that moksha may stay out of reach for the majority of humanity. A second counter-argument says that the pursuit of moksha might lead a person to ignore social duties. In Hindu thought, duties called dogma are important for keeping society balanced. Some worry that if a person focuses only on personal liberation, he may neglect his family, his community, or his country. The worry is that a strong desire for detachment could become selfish, because the person might think that all worldly concerns are just distractions. Critics ask, does the promise of moksha make a person less likely to help others, to feed the hungry, or to protect the environment? This question has been debated by scholars for centuries. Historical anecdotes help to see how these debates played out in real life. One story from the ancient texts tells of King Harishchandra, a ruler known for his honesty. When a god tested his devotion, Harishchandra gave up his throne, his wealth, and even his son. He worked as a night watchman, ate simple food, and endured great shame. Yet he never gave up his promise to stay true to truth. In the end, the gods restored his kingdom and his family, rewarding his sacrifice. The tale shows a king who chose duty and truth over comfort, and it is often cited as an example of how moksha can be sought through self-sacrifice, while still honoring one's social role. A different kind of story comes from medieval Varanasi, a city famous for its scholars. In the 14th century, a group of Advaita philosophers gathered in a courtyard to debate the nature of moksha. One scholar named Madhusudana argued that moksha is immediate for anyone who truly sees the self as Brahman. Another, named Vijnabhikshu, countered that a gradual purification of the mind is needed before that realization can happen. Their debate lasted days, with each side quoting verses from the Upanishads and the Bhagavata Purana. The audience, made up of monks, merchants, and students, listened quietly, taking notes. The debate ended without a clear winner, but it left a lasting impression that the path to moksha can be both sudden and slow, depending on the seeker's readiness. Modern thinkers still talk about moksha in everyday language. Some teachers compare moksha to the feeling of finishing a long marathon. The runner feels exhausted, but also proud and free. The body may still ache, but the mind knows it has reached the finish line. Others liken moksha to a computer that finally shuts down after a long day of processing. The screen goes dark, the fan stops, and the machine rests. The hardware is still there, but the activity that caused stress has ended. These analogies help people who do not study ancient texts to grasp the calm that moksha promises. Real-world applications of moksha ideas appear in modern mindfulness practice. When a person learns to observe thoughts without clinging to them, he experiences a small taste of liberation. In a busy city, a commuter who watches the traffic without anger feels a brief release from the usual cycle of irritation. That moment is a tiny version of moksha, a glimpse of the larger freedom that the ancient sages described. In social work, volunteers who serve without expecting reward often report a deep sense of peace. Their selfless action mirrors the idea that letting go of personal gain can open a path to inner freedom. The concept of moksha also influences art and literature. In a popular Indian film, the hero walks away from a life of violence after realizing that his actions only add to suffering. He says, "I have seen the end of the road, and I choose peace." That line echoes the ancient teaching that true victory is not over enemies, but over the inner cravings that bind a person to the cycle of rebirth. In poetry, a modern writer describes a garden where the flowers bloom without worry about the next season. The poet writes, "The garden knows no fear, it simply grows, and in that growth it is free." The poem reflects the same idea that moksha is a natural state when fear is gone. Quotes from primary sources add weight to the discussion. The Bhagavata Purana, in its third canto, says, "When the mind rests in the self, the world of illusion disappears, and the soul rests in its own light." Vidyaranya, in his commentary on the Brahma Sutras, writes, "The seeker who sees the self as the only reality is already beyond birth and death." These lines show that the ancient writers saw moksha as a direct experience, not just a distant hope. Linking back to the earlier sections, the idea of Atman as the true self is the core of moksha. When the Atman is recognized as identical with Brahman, the cycle of karma stops producing new births. Yoga is the practice that steadies the mind so that this recognition can happen. The earlier discussion of karma explained how actions plant seeds for future experiences. Moksha is the point where those seeds no longer grow, because the mind no longer needs to sow them. To bring the ideas home, two more everyday examples are useful. First, think of a student who finally masters a difficult math problem after weeks of effort. The moment of understanding feels like a release of tension, a clear view of the solution. That moment is like a mini moksha for the mind. The problem that held the student captive is solved, and the mind can move on. Second, picture a gardener who removes all the weeds from a plot, leaving only the plants that he wants to grow. The garden becomes easier to care for, and the plants thrive. In the same way, when a person clears away false beliefs and attachments, the true self can grow without obstruction. Critics who say moksha is unattainable point to the fact that most people die without ever hearing the word moksha. Yet many teachers respond that moksha is not a distant prize, but a present possibility that can be felt in small moments. They argue that the feeling of being free from fear, even for a brief time, is a sign that moksha is already at work. The other criticism about social detachment is answered by the idea of karma yoga, the path of selfless action. In this view, a person can work for the good of others while staying detached from personal gain, and that very balance leads toward liberation. The story of King Harishchandra shows that sacrifice can be done without abandoning one's role as a ruler, because the king still cared for his people even while he faced hardship. The medieval debates in Varanasi illustrate how the community of scholars tried to keep the discussion grounded. They did not want moksha to become an excuse for ignoring the world. Their arguments often return to the principle that true liberation includes responsibility. One participant said, "A lamp that burns out cannot light a dark room." In other words, a person who has reached moksha should still be a source of light for others, not a candle that disappears. In modern times, the idea of moksha has been taken into new fields. Psychologists who study flow states note that when a person is fully absorbed in an activity, the sense of self expands and the fear of failure fades. They compare that state to a kind of everyday moksha. Environmental activists who live simply, using few resources, say they feel a deeper connection to the world, as if the barrier between self and nature has lifted. Their lifestyle reflects the ancient teaching that when the self is not bound by desire, it can merge with the larger reality. To sum up, moksha is described as the end of the cycle of birth, a state of pure peace, and a return to the true self. The bird leaving its cage and the student receiving a diploma both illustrate how freedom feels. Thinkers like Vidyaranya and texts like the Bhagavata Purana give clear definitions, while stories of King Harishchandra and the Varanasi debate show how the idea works in real life. Counterarguments remind that moksha may seem out of reach for many, and that it could be misread as an excuse. The story of Hindu gods and goddesses begins with the idea that a single reality can wear many faces. In the oldest Vedic hymns, the word Brahman appears as the great all-pervading spirit. Later, the Puranas turn that abstract spirit into characters that people can see, hear, and love. Vishnu, Shiva, and Devi become the most well-known. Each one is a way to look at the same endless source. Vishnu is called the preserver. He keeps the world in balance. Stories tell how he sends avatars like Krishna to protect the good and guide the lost. Shiva is called the destroyer, but also the transformer. He breaks old forms so new life can grow. He is the dancer who steps on the ego and opens a path to freedom. Devi is the mother, the creative power that brings the world into being. She appears as Durga, as Kali, as Lakshmi, each form showing a different side of love, strength, or wealth. The three are often called the Trimurti. The word tri means three and murti means form. The Trimurti is like a family. In a family, a father, a mother, and a child each have a role, but all belong to the same bloodline. The family works together. In the same way, Vishnu, Shiva, and Devi each have a role, but they belong to the same divine line. The family picture helps a child see that many faces do not mean many separate beings. Another simple picture is a smartphone. A phone can call, send messages, play music, and take pictures. Each app looks different, but all run on the same device. Phone is the hardware. The apps are the functions. Vishnu, Shiva, and Devi are like apps that run on the same spiritual hardware of Brahman. The hardware does not change when the apps change. The idea that many forms point to one reality is not new. The Upanishads, written around 800 BCE, already speak of a single spirit behind all things. The later Puranas, written between the 4th and 10th centuries CE, give that spirit many names and stories. The storytellers of the Puranas, such as Vyasa, used vivid tales to bring the abstract into daily life. They told how Vishnu rescued the world as Narasimha, how Shiva drank poison to save the gods, how Devi defeated demons with her many arms. Their stories made the ideas easy to remember and to feel. Philosophers took the stories and turned them into arguments. Madhva, a 13th century thinker, argued for a clear separation between the divine and the soul. He said that Vishnu is the supreme being and every other god is a servant of Vishnu. Madhva wrote, "The Supreme Lord is the cause of all, and the cause is never the effect." He used that line to show that worship of any form is really worship of the one supreme. Ramanuja, who lived a century before Madhva, offered a different view. He said that the soul and the divine are different, but they can be close friends. He called this qualified non-dualism. He wrote, "The Lord is both the master and the friend of the soul." Ramanuja spread Vaishnavism, the devotion to Vishnu, across South India. He travelled to many towns, taught the verses of the Bhagavad Gita, and set up temples where people could sing the name of Vishnu together. His work made the worship of Vishnu a community activity, not just a personal habit. Both Madhva and Ramanuja used the many forms to show a single truth. They said that seeing Vishnu, Shiva, or Devi is like seeing a different color of the same light. The light does not change, only the eye's perception does. One argument for the many faces is that they let people choose a path that fits their mind. A warrior may feel drawn to Shiva's fierce dance. A farmer may feel comfort in Devi's nurturing care. A teacher may find wisdom in Vishnu's calm guidance. The many forms give each person a doorway to the same room. A second argument is that the many forms keep the religion alive in many cultures. In the north, Shiva's festivals dominate. In the south, Vishnu's temples are most common. In the east, Devi's worship is strongest. Each region adds its own music, food, and dress. The whole tradition stays vibrant because it can change with the people. There are also strong counter-arguments. Some say that having many gods makes the religion confusing. A new student may wonder which god is the most important. They may think that the stories clash, like two teachers giving opposite advice. The confusion can stop a person from feeling sure about what to believe. A second counter-argument comes from monotheistic traditions that call Hinduism polytheistic. They point to the many statues, the many names, and say that true worship should have only one name. They argue that the claim of one reality is just a cover for many gods. Both counter-arguments have answers. The first answer says that the many faces are tools, not contradictions. The same way a toolbox has many tools but only one job, the gods are tools for the same purpose. When a person learns the purpose, the tools no longer cause confusion. The second answer says that the claim of one reality is not a cover but a core belief. The word polytheism means many separate gods. Hindu thought says the gods are not separate. They are parts of one whole. The claim that there are many gods is true only if one looks at the surface. The deeper view sees one source. Real-world life shows how the many faces work. During the festival of Diwali, families light lamps and pray to Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth. At the same time, they also recite verses about Vishnu's victory over the demon Narakasura. The two prayers happen together, showing that worship of Devi and Vishnu can share a night. In the month of Shravan, many people fast and chant the name of Shiva. Yet they also read the Bhagavad Gita, a text that teaches Vishnu's teachings. The daily schedule of a devotee may include both a Shiva mantra and a Vishnu mantra. The practice of bhakti yoga, the path of love, often mixes the names. The earlier section on bhakti yoga explained that love for any form is love for the whole. The current discussion shows how that love can move between forms. Another example is the practice of dharma, the duty that each person has. A student's dharma may be to study. A farmer's dharma may be to grow crops. The teachings say that doing one's dharma is a way to honor the divine. When a farmer thanks Devi for a good harvest, he is also honoring the same reality that Vishnu protects the world and Shiva renews the cycles. The earlier Dharma section described how duty is a bridge between the human world and the divine. Modern thinkers often read the many faces as symbols for inner states. A psychologist may say that Vishnu's calm represents the mind at peace, Shiva's dance represents the mind's change, and Devi's nurture represents the heart's compassion. In this view, the gods are not only outside figures, but also maps of the inner life. The modern movement called New Age Hinduism often uses this symbolic reading. People who do not grow up in India may still feel a connection to the stories, because the stories talk about love, fear, courage, and loss, feelings that all humans know. The story of the Brihadiswara temple gives a concrete picture of how a single god can inspire many people. In the 11th century CE, the king Raja Chola decided to build a massive temple for Shiva in the city of Thanjavur. He hired thousands of workers, sculptors, and engineers. The main tower rose over 180 feet, and a huge statue of Shiva sits at the top. The king said that the temple was built to honor Shiva's power to destroy ignorance. Yet the same stone also shows scenes of Vishnu and Devi, because the sculptors wanted to show that all gods share the same space. The temple still stands today, and visitors feel the presence of many deities under one roof. The story shows how a single building can hold many faces, and how a ruler can use that idea to bring people together. Another historical anecdote is the spread of Vaishnavism under Ramanuja. After studying the Vedas, Ramanuja traveled to many villages in Tamil Nadu. He taught that loving Vishnu was the easiest way to reach the divine. He set up a system of worship that let people chant Om Namo Narayanaya together. He also opened temples to people of all castes, which was unusual at the time. His students carried his teachings to far-off towns, and soon whole regions began to celebrate Vishnu's festivals with music and dance. The spread of Vaishnavism shows how a single focus on one form can still respect the larger idea of many forms, because Vishnu himself is described as the source of all other gods. Quotes from primary sources give a voice to the ancient ideas. The Bhagavad Gita, a part of the Mahabharata, says, "He who sees all beings in the self, and the self in all beings, never turns away from the truth." This line tells that seeing the divine in every form is the goal. The Upanishad called the Katha Upanishad states, "All that is seen and unseen is one." The verse reminds that the many faces are really one. Madhva wrote, "The Lord is the cause of all, and the cause is never the effect." His line makes clear that worship of any. In the quiet village of Varanasi, a neighbor sees a broken fence. The neighbor walks over, picks up the fallen boards, and helps to rebuild it. The act is simple, but it shows a deep idea that runs through Hindu thought. The idea is ahimsa, or non-violence. Ahimsa means not harming any living thing, not only with weapons but also with words and deeds. The neighbor's help does not cause pain. It brings calm. The story is used to show how non-violence works in daily life. A child once tells a small lie about breaking a vase. The child says the vase fell by accident, though the truth is that the child knocked it over. The lie brings a little worry to the family. The child learns that truth, or satya, is a strong value in Hindu ethics. When truth is spoken, trust grows. When it is hidden, trust shrinks. The child's simple mistake becomes a lesson about satya. The roots of ahimsa go back to the ancient sages of the Vedas. The word appears in the early Upanishads, where it is linked to the idea of dharma, or right conduct. Dharma is the path that keeps the world in balance. It is tied to karma, the law that actions bring results. When a person follows ahimsa, the karma that follows is gentle. When a person harms, the karma is heavy. One of the earliest teachers who made ahimsa a central rule was Mahavira, the 24th Tirthankara of Jainism. Mahavira taught that every soul is equal. He said, "All life is one, and harming any life is harming oneself." His words spread beyond Jain circles and influenced Hindu thinkers. Mahavira's strict practice of non-violence inspired later leaders. Mahatma Gandhi took ahimsa into modern politics. Gandhi wrote, "Ahimsa is the highest law." He used non-violent protest to fight for Indian independence. He believed that a non-violent method could change the heart of the oppressor. Gandhi's approach showed that ahimsa can be a tool for social change, not just a personal rule. The ancient Dharmastra texts also speak about ahimsa and satya. The Manusmriti, a well-known Dharmastra, says that a ruler must protect his people without causing injury. It advises that a person should speak the truth, even when it is hard. The text states, "One who tells falsehood harms the order of the world." These verses tie personal ethics to the larger social order. The idea of truth is also found in the Bhagavad Gita. In the Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, "Speak the truth, even if it hurts." The Gita links truth to the inner self. When a person is true to the self, the outer world becomes clearer. The Gita's advice fits the child's story about the vase. The child learns that truth is a way to keep the inner self calm. The caste system, or Varna, is another part of Hindu social thought. The system divides society into four main groups: Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. The Dharmastra texts describe each group's duties, or dharma. For a Brahmin, dharma is study and teaching. For a Kshatriya, dharma is protection. The texts say that when each group follows its dharma, the whole society works well. One ancient story tells how the Buddha was born. His mother, Maya, dreamed of a white elephant. When the child was born, he took 7 steps and declared that all beings are his friends. This story shows a vision of equality. The Buddha later taught that the soul's worth is not tied to birth. His teaching challenged the idea that caste decides a person's value. In medieval India, bhakti poets rose to speak against caste. The poet Kabir, a weaver, sang that the divine lives in every heart, not just in a high caste. He said, "The river does not ask who is standing on its bank." His verses made people think that devotion, not birth, matters. Another poet, Andal, a woman from a low-status family, wrote love songs to the god Vishnu. Her work showed that anyone could reach the divine through love. These poets gave a counter-argument to the strict caste rules. They showed that the system can block equality. The caste system can keep people from learning, from working together, and from sharing resources. When a person is judged only by birth, the chance for growth is limited. This is a strong critique that still matters today. A second counter-argument comes from the idea of extreme ahimsa. Some people argue that never harming anything can stop a person from protecting others. If a body harms a child, an extreme non-violent stance might stop the child from defending himself. Critics say that a world without any defense can let injustice grow. They ask whether ahimsa can be applied in every situation. Supporters of ahimsa answer that the rule is not about being weak. They say it is about finding ways to stop harm without violence. Gandhi's Satyagraha, or truth force, is an example. He showed that a crowd can stop a train without hurting anyone, just by standing in its path. The method works by making the oppressor feel the moral weight of his actions. Modern life shows many places where ahimsa and truth matter. In a classroom, a teacher can choose not to use harsh punishment. By speaking kindly, the teacher follows ahimsa. The teacher also tells the truth about grades, helping students trust the system. In a business, a company can choose to avoid animal testing. That choice follows ahimsa. The company also tells customers the real source of its products, practicing satya. The idea of dharma still guides many people today. A doctor may see his work as dharma, a service to keep life healthy. He follows ahimsa by not harming patients. He follows satya by being honest about risks. The doctor also respects the karma idea, knowing that each action will affect his future. In politics, leaders often speak about social dharma. They claim that their duty is to protect the poor and the weak. When they use non-violent protests, they echo the ancient teachings. When they hide the truth, they break the old rule of satya. The public can see the link between ancient ideas and modern actions. A popular story from the Ramayana helps explain Dharma. Rama, a prince, accepts exile because his father promised a promise. He could have fought to stay, but he chose duty over desire. The story shows that Dharma sometimes asks for sacrifice. It also shows that truth to a promise is part of Dharma. The concept of karma ties all these ideas together. When a person acts with ahimsa, the karma that follows is calm. When a person lies, the karma brings confusion. When a person respects caste too rigidly, the karma can cause division. The law of cause and effect reminds people to think before they act. In modern science, researchers study the effects of non-violence on the brain. They find that people who practice calm and non-violent habits have lower stress levels. The science backs the ancient claim that ahimsa brings inner peace. The research also shows that truth-telling builds stronger relationships, which matches the old teachings. One modern example of ahimsa is the movement to protect bees. Farmers avoid pesticides that kill insects. By protecting the tiny lives, they keep the environment healthy. This act follows the rule of not harming living things. It also supports the larger dharma of caring for the earth. Another modern example is the rise of truth fact-checking in media. When news outlets verify their stories, they follow satya. The public can trust the information and society stays healthier. When false stories spread, the social fabric weakens, showing the cost of lying. The ancient texts also warn about misuse of caste. The Mahabharata includes a story where a king tries to force a low-born girl into marriage. The hero Krishna steps in and says that love and duty are higher than birth. The tale shows that the system can be abused and that higher values can correct it. In the 20th century, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar fought against caste oppression. He wrote, "Caste is a cancer that must be removed." His work helped write the Indian Constitution, which says all people are equal. Ambedkar's fight is a modern echo of the Bhakti poets' challenge to caste. The teachings of Ahimsa, Satya, and Dharma also appear in yoga practice. A yogi learns to move without hurting the body. The practice of non-violence to oneself is called ahimsa, toward the inner self. The yogi also learns to be honest about thoughts, a form of satya. The whole practice aims at better karma. When a person looks at the world through these lenses, everyday choices become moral choices. Choosing to recycle, to speak kindly, to help a neighbor, all become acts of dharma. The ancient ideas become a guide for modern life. The story of the Buddha's birth also teaches about truth. When the Buddha was born, he walked 7 steps and declared that all beings are his friends. He later taught that the truth of suffering leads to the path out of it. The lesson is that seeing reality clearly, without denial, is a form of satya. A third anecdote comes from the life of the saint Ramanuja. He was born in a low-status family, but rose to become a great teacher. He argued that devotion is open to all, not just the high castes. His life shows that the caste rule can be broken by knowledge and devotion. The modern world also faces new challenges. Technology can spread false information quickly. The ancient rule of satya urges people to check facts before sharing. Social media platforms can become tools for truth if used responsibly. Environmental crises call for ahimsa toward nature. Cutting down a forest harms many lives. The rule of non-violence asks people to find ways to grow food without destroying habitats. The idea is that all life is connected, a view that appears in the Upanishads. In the workplace, a manager may face a dilemma. An employee makes a mistake that hurts a client. The manager can punish harshly or can guide the employee to fix the error. Choosing the gentle path follows ahimsa. Being honest about the mistake follows satya. The outcome builds trust and better results. The ancient law of karma reminds that actions echo forward. A person who lies may gain short-term benefit, but later faces loss of trust. A person who harms may gain power, but later faces conflict. The law encourages people to think about the long view. One quote from the Mahabharata says, "One who does not speak the truth cannot be trusted." This line is often used to stress the value of satya. Another quote from the Upanishads says, "All beings are one, and harming one harms all." This line captures the spirit of ahimsa. The Dharmastra also contains a warning about rigid caste rules. It says that a ruler must treat all subjects with fairness, not only those of his own class. The text advises that justice should rise above birth. This advice supports modern ideas of equality. The Bhakti poet Mirabai, a princess, wrote love songs to Krishna that ignored her royal status. She faced criticism for stepping outside her expected role. Her devotion showed that love and truth can cross social boundaries. Her story inspires people to follow inner truth over external rules. In modern education, teachers can apply these ideas by encouraging students to speak honestly and to treat classmates with respect. When a student cheats, the teacher can use the incident to teach about the cost of lying. When a student bullies, the teacher can show how non-violence creates a safer class. The concept of ahimsa also appears in modern law. Many countries have laws against animal cruelty. These laws reflect the ancient belief that harming living beings is wrong. The laws turn an old moral idea into a public rule. When people think about caste today, they may see it as a social label. Some still use it to decide marriage or jobs. Critics argue that this limits talent and fairness. The ancient idea that each person has a dharma, a personal duty, can be read as a call for each person to follow their own path, not just the path set by birth. A modern movement called Dalit Rights fights against caste discrimination. Activists quote ancient texts that say all beings are equal. They also quote Gandhi, who said, "No one is born a slave." Their work shows that ancient ideas can be used to push for social change. The practice of ahimsa can be taken to an extreme, as some critics note. If a person refuses to defend a friend who is being attacked, the friend may be hurt. The modern world carries many threads of ancient Hindu thought. In city parks, in quiet rooms of yoga studios, in the glow of a phone screen, the ideas of dharma, yoga, and balance appear again and again. The story of this spread began long before the present day, yet it still feels fresh for each new seeker. In 1893, a gathering called the Parliament of the World's Religions opened in Chicago. A young Indian monk named Swami Vivekananda stepped onto the stage and spoke of a universal truth that could hold many peoples together. He said, "The whole secret of existence is to have no fear." His words echoed the Upanishadic idea that the self is not separate from the world. The crowd responded with applause that lasted minutes. That moment marked the first large public introduction of Hindu ideas to a Western audience. It also set a pattern. A clear, simple message from an ancient source, delivered in a modern setting, can travel far. Later, in the 1960s, a different kind of crowd gathered around Hindu practice. Young people in California, tired of the material rush of post-war America, turned to yoga, meditation, and the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. They saw in the practice a way to quiet the mind and find purpose. The famous phrase, "Be the change you wish to see in the world," often linked to Mahatma Gandhi, became a motto for many in that era. Though Gandhi never wrote those exact words, the spirit of his teaching on non-violence and self-service inspired a generation that mixed rock music with asanas and chanting. This cultural moment showed how Hindu ideas could be reshaped to fit a new lifestyle while still keeping a core sense of purpose. Today, those early sparks have grown into a forest of everyday practices. In a downtown park, a group of strangers meets each morning at sunrise. They sit on a circle of mats, close their eyes, and follow a guided meditation that mentions the breath as a bridge between body and spirit. The guide often cites the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, which defines yoga as the stilling of the mind. Participants notice how the simple act of watching the breath creates a feeling of balance, a word that appears many times in Hindu philosophy as a harmony between action and inner calm. The park group calls itself Balance in the City, a name that directly reflects the ancient concept of samatva, equal treatment of all experiences. A tech startup called Equipulse illustrates another modern use of the same idea. Its founders read the Bhagavad Gita and were struck by the verse that says, "Perform your duty, but remain unattached to the result." They built a platform that helps users track work tasks while reminding them to pause and breathe. The app flashes a small icon of a lotus whenever a deadline approaches, urging the user to remember the principle of karma yoga, selfless action. The company's mission statement quotes the Gita: "Act, but do not cling to the fruit of your labor." In this way, a corporate environment receives a philosophical filter that encourages balance and reduces stress. The spread of these ideas is not limited to meditation rooms or software. Environmental movements have taken up Hindu concepts of ahimsa, non-violence, and prithvi, the earth, as guiding values. A community garden in a coastal town holds a weekly ceremony that thanks the soil, the water, and the wind. The ceremony reads a passage from the Atharva Veda that describes the earth as a mother who nourishes all life. Volunteers report that this simple ritual makes them feel a deeper connection to the land, and they tend the garden with more care. The garden's leader often repeats the line, "When you protect the earth, you protect yourself," echoing the Hindu view that the world and the self are not separate. Scholars today examine how these adaptations work. Doctor's work. Arvind Sharma, a professor of comparative religion, notes that the core teachings of Hinduism are flexible enough to fit many contexts. He writes, "The idea of balance is not a fixed rule, but a living practice that can be shaped by each culture." Dr. Diana Eck, who studies religious pluralism, adds that the spread of Hindu ideas shows a global conversation where ancient wisdom meets modern need. Both scholars point out that the appeal lies in the simplicity of the core message. Find inner calm, act with purpose, respect all life. However, not everyone sees this spread as wholly positive. One major criticism is that commercialization can dilute the original meaning. When a large chain opens a yoga studio that charges high fees and decorates the walls with bright logos, some argue that the practice becomes a product rather than a path. The original purpose of yoga, described in the Bhagavad Gita as a means to unite the self with the divine, may be lost when the focus shifts to profit. Critics say that the word yoga can turn into a brand name, much like a candy wrapper that hides the flavor inside. They warn that when the practice is sold as a quick fix for stress, the deeper discipline and ethical foundation are ignored. A second counter-argument concerns cultural appropriation. Some people feel that taking Hindu symbols, chants, or practices out of their cultural context disrespects the tradition. For example, a fashion brand that prints the Om symbol on a t-shirt without understanding its spiritual significance may be seen as disrespectful. Activists point out that the Om is a sacred sound that represents the whole universe, and using it as a decorative element can feel like theft. They argue that true respect requires learning the history, listening to teachers, and acknowledging the source. This view does not reject the sharing of ideas, but it asks for care and humility in how they are presented. Both criticisms have merit. The balance between sharing and preserving is itself a kind of yoga, a practice of holding two truths at once. When a yoga studio offers free classes to low-income neighborhoods, it shows how commercial success can fund generosity. When a mindfulness app includes a section that teaches the meaning of the Sanskrit terms, it shows respect for the source. These examples illustrate that the modern impact of Hindu philosophy can be both a source of growth and a test of integrity. Analogies help to see this balance. Imagine a river that flows from a mountain to the sea. The river carries water, minerals, and life along its path. If a dam blocks the river, the water may be used for power, but the natural flow is altered. If the river is allowed to run free, it nourishes the land, but may also flood. Hindu philosophy acts like the river's source, providing a steady current of ideas. Modern uses act like the banks and channels that guide the water. When the banks are built with care, the river supports many lives. When the banks are built without thought, the water may cause damage or lose its purity. Historical anecdotes add texture to this picture. One story tells of a British officer in the early 1900s who attended a lecture by Swami Vivekananda in London. The officer was moved by the talk on karma and later wrote a letter describing how he began to treat his soldiers with more compassion, believing that each action would return to him. Another anecdote recounts how a group of engineers in Bangalore, inspired by the principle of Lila, the idea that the universe plays like a game, created a software tool that encourages users to see work as a playful experiment rather than a burden. Both stories show how ancient ideas can shape personal behavior in very different settings. The modern impact also appears in the realm of health. A study published by a university in California found that participants who practiced a daily meditation based on the Upanishadic concept of neti neti, not this, not that, reported lower anxiety. The practice invites people to notice thoughts and let them pass, similar to the ancient teaching that the self is beyond all labels. The study's lead researcher, Dr. Maya Patel, explained that the technique works because it trains the mind to detach from stressful patterns, a lesson that is as old as the Vedas. In the world of education, a school in New York introduced a weekly class called Living Philosophy. The class reads short verses from the Bhagavad Gita and asks students to write about how the ideas relate to their own lives. One student wrote, "When I help a friend without expecting thanks, I feel calm inside." The teacher quotes the Gita, "When duty is performed without desire for reward, the soul attains peace." This simple classroom activity shows how ancient wisdom can be turned into a modern habit of reflection. The rise of mindfulness apps also reflects this trend. An app called Inner Light includes a guided session that begins with the Sanskrit phrase Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, which means peace, peace, peace. The app explains that the triple repetition invites the mind to settle into 3 layers of peace: personal, social, and universal. Users report that the simple chant helps them focus. The developers credit the practice to the ancient tradition of japa, repeating a sacred sound to calm the mind. By providing a short explanation, the app respects the origin while making it accessible. All these examples share a common thread. They take a principle from Hindu philosophy and place it into a modern frame. The principle of balance appears in a park meditation, in a startup's design, in a garden's ritual, and in a classroom's discussion. The principle of selfless action shows up in a tech platform that reminds users not to cling to outcomes, and in a charity program run by a yoga studio. The principle of nonviolence guides an environmental group that treats the earth as a living being. Each case shows a living link between ancient thought and current life. The story also includes moments of tension. When a popular music festival featured a stage named On Stage, Some audience members cheered, while a group of scholars raised a hand and said, "Remember, the sound is a prayer, not a decoration." The festival organizers later added a note to the program explaining the meaning of the chant. This small change turned a potential conflict into an educational moment, showing how awareness can grow from criticism. Another recent incident involved a fashion brand that printed the image of Krishna playing a flute on a hoodie. The brand received backlash on social media, with people demanding an apology. The company responded by partnering with a Hindu cultural center to create a line of clothing that includes a short description of the story behind Krishna's music. Sales increased, and many customers said they felt they were learning something new. This episode illustrates how a misstep can become a bridge when the right steps are taken. The modern impact of Hindu philosophy is not a single line, but a network of many lines. It touches health, technology, environment, art, and daily habits. It invites people to ask simple questions. How can I stay calm in a busy world? How can I act without needing praise? How can I respect the earth as a living partner? The answers often point back to ideas that have been spoken for thousands of years. As the narrative moves forward, the voice of Swami Vivekananda still rings clear. He once said, "Take up one idea, make that one